to put end-of-life decisions in Colorado's hands. Our bill is modeled after the law that has worked in Oregon for over 15 years, and it does 4 basic things. A patient must be diagnosed as being terminally ill. 2 doctors must have determined that the patient is about 6 months from death. The individual must be able to self-administer, and the doctors must also determine that the individual is mentally competent. Colorado is not alone in this effort. Besides Oregon, Washington, Vermont, Montana, and New Mexico have laws already in place, and over a dozen other states, including our neighbor Wyoming, are looking at this kind of legislation this year. I came to this cause because last year a man named Charlie Salisbury wrote a letter to the editor at the Denver Post, which he addressed to the legislature. In it, he asked us to help him because he knew he was dying and he wanted the final decision to be his. I found out that Charlie was a constituent, and I wrote a letter to him saying his words would not be in vain, that he had touched my heart. Sadly, Charlie is no longer with us. He died shortly after his letter, but his daughter Julie, with whom I've become quite good friends since then, is here to share her story. I can't help but cry every time I think about Charlie. Julie.
There was a moment in his final minutes of life when my dad had stopped breathing, but his heart was still beating. And the nurse told me to keep talking, that he could still hear me. So I repeated what I had been saying to him for the past 2 weeks. I told him that I loved him. I thanked him for everything that he did for me and my kids and my family and my siblings. And I told him that I was so sorry that he had to suffer. I gave him my word that I would continue his effort. And just as Representative Court has kept her promise, so am I. My dad was not an activist. He wrote his first letter to the editor at age 77. I am not an activist. I have yet to write my first letter to the editor. We are just an ordinary family trying to lend a voice from a terrible experience that we had to have something positive come from it. I'm not advocating for anyone to follow this end-of-life option. I am not advocating for any doctor to participate if he or she does not wish. But it is so obvious to me that it is the kind and compassionate option to give to somebody who would want it. And under the terms of this bill and the restrictions that it places, it is the right thing to do. It's somebody who could qualify to take advantage of this option. My dad wanted this option, and now I know there are a lot of other people who want this option, and he was not alone. As the ALS progressed and his body failed to the point where he no longer wanted to live, it had reached his line in the sand. My dad wanted control, and he wanted to die with his dignity intact. That is a personal line in the sand that none of us, not even those who were closest to him, could set or could alter. It went to the core of his autonomy. When he hit that line, he wished for 2 things. He wanted to die at home, and he wanted to die peacefully. He got neither of those. It took his body 13 days to shut down, as if from dying from ALS wasn't cruel enough. But starving himself to death was the only legal option that he had. It was terrible for all of us. He wrote the open letter with the hopes of helping others, and we hope that it does. He would be very humbled by today's events. Sorry. On behalf of my dad and my family, I thank Representatives Court and Janelle and Senator Guzman for sponsoring this bill. And to the rest of the General Assembly, I ask you, please show mercy on the terminally ill. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. As I said, Charlie's letters have touched my heart, and Julie's words always touch my heart. Now I'd like to introduce my prime co-sponsor in the House, Representative Joanne Janal.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Julie. Your father would be very proud of these comments that are being made. I've worked in the medical community for many years, and I've recognized the incredible medical advances that are available to all of us. We live in a time of having the ability to lengthen and to improve life of someone who is chronically ill. The advances that are available to patients have done so much good for so many. But not everyone can benefit from what modern medicine has to offer. A growing number of terminally ill patients wish to exercise the freedom to reject treatment altogether. Whether it's seeking the excellent care that hospice can provide, discontinuing life support, or being able to obtain a life-ending medication, it should be that individual's choice. Since first announcing this bill, I've received hundreds of letters and emails and phone calls and people who stop me on the street and on my way to the office, literally from across the state. Many of these personal stories were about loved ones who suffered horrible deaths, loved ones who would have been comforted by knowing that there is an option at the end of that suffering. One of my own constituents, whose wife is here today, is a well-known and respected physician from Fort Collins. He just recently lost the battle of ALS less than a week ago. Dr. Charles Hatchett told me that while he valued every moment of his life and he wanted to live it as long as he could, he also knew that he would reach a point where he would become totally helpless with no remaining quality of life. And sadly, the existing laws were not enough to provide Dr. Hatchett or Charlie with what he wanted. This bill represents a personal freedom. For that, some is taken away in the final stages of a terminal illness. Physicians must give patients the best possible care, but there are times when the physician can no longer be able to heal. For many patients, pain medications, hospice, and palliative care are very successful to achieve a very peaceful end. But for others who cannot find relief from such interventions, we must offer another choice.
Thank you, Representative Janal. I'm very, very pleased to have you working on this bill with me. And now I'd like to introduce Senator Lucia Guzman, who is an ordained minister and brings a different perspective to this discussion. Senator Guzman.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be the Senate sponsor of this bill. I stand here today as someone who loves life. I mean, I love every bit of life, every new day, every season. With all of its challenges, ups and downs, I still love life, like you and I. and I'm thankful for the journey that we call life. As a pastor, I have walked and journeyed with many people whose journey of life ended long before mine. We all know that life's journey, in fact, will end, and that life's journey is not forever. When we are told by the best medical and scientific community, by these professionals, that our life is coming to an end, that the end is a few months away, it is at this time that life's journey becomes one of the most sacred of times. And it is at this time that we long for the most profound opportunities for dignity, for personal strength, and for peace. This is the time that calls for us to make a personal decision, to make a choice, or to make several choices. But to make a choice is at the heart and soul of this journey's last challenge. And it is a personal choice. It is a freedom that each individual should have, and it is the most important time for independent freedom of choice. We are free to choose the best options which will equip us, which will embrace us, which will hold us at those last days. We are free to choose. Nothing more is important. Nothing is more sacred than to have the freedom of choice at this time. I have always respected and been in awe of the hospice care and palliative care that are offered to people in this country, in this state, and in this community. But the personal choice offered through this bill is simply an additional profound option for dying with dignity. The ability for a person to make a decision at this most sacred time in their life is at the heart and soul of the choice, and in fact, it is the heart and soul of this bill. All people want to experience peace and a sense of gratitude in their last days, an opportunity to be thankful for the journey they've had and to move on to what comes next. And every person from every sector of life is due this dignity.
Thank you, Senator Guzman. I want to make a couple of things really clear. These people are not suicidal. Their disease is going to kill them. They want to choose the what, the where, the when, the with whom, and particularly the with whom, so that they'll have comfort, both psychological and physical, at that time in their journey, as Senator Guzman has said so eloquently. It's also really important to understand this is totally voluntary. No one, not physician, not pharmacist, not caregiver, not patient, no one has to do this. This is totally voluntary, and people who want to do it have to ask for it 3 times, both in writing and verbally, before they can be given the prescription. I want to make that very, very clear that this is totally voluntary. Representative Janal will make some final comments.
Thank you, Representative Court. We bring this bill to our state at the request of our constituents. Over 60% of Coloradans support this bill. The reality is that every one of us will eventually die. As Coloradans, we value our freedom to make our own decisions. Shouldn't our freedom to choose how we die be one of those? We ask all our colleagues to listen to their constituents and allow this bill to become a law. Thank you.
We're happy to answer questions. Questions?
So,
Charles?
okay, so I'm trying to figure out, I'm looking at this one side here, it says 17 years you cannot communicate. You have a lot of people who are in this kind of situation. You're talking about mental competency. How do you determine that? It's got to be a very hard thing to do. Determine mental competency to be able to let somebody go ahead and do this, especially if they can't communicate.
Thank you. First, the person has to be terminally ill, which is diagnosed at
Right.
6 months
Right. I
of
mean, I
life.
get all that medical side, and that's fine, but
And they have to be of sound mind.
Right.
And they have to take the medication.
how do you get to that? How do you know that? How do you
Two
determine that?
physicians must make that determination that that person, that terminally ill person,
Okay.
is in fact terminally ill and that they're competent.
How do you determine somebody's competent?
The same way that medical doctors make a determination if someone's terminally ill. And if they do have any doubt, those two physicians, that that person may be depressed, coerced, or another way have some sort of psychological condition that may impede this, then they will refer that patient to a psychologist, psychiatric examination. So there's really possibly 3 physicians
So then
involved.
who picks the doctors? I can imagine people with doctor shops.
A patient, probably, it's the patient's right to choose who they want for a second opinion. They will probably use their primary care doctor or an oncologist, whoever they're working with this terminal illness. Yes, sir.
Opponents basically are saying that this bill is giving up on the patient.